Welcome to today's Explainer. We are peeling back the curtain on a seriously high-stakes topic, how autocracies actually work. From the outside looking in, a dictatorship usually looks like this massive monolith, right? Just a rigid system totally controlled by one all-powerful guy. But behind closed doors, it's literally a relentless do-or-die survival game. We're going to dig into the secret mechanics of power, exploring those hidden rules that basically dictate who survives, who falls, and how these brutal political machines really operate on a day-to-day basis.
So, let me ask you something to kick things off. Who is a dictator's absolute biggest threat? If you just watch the evening news or casually read history books, the answer probably seems totally obvious. You'd likely guess that dictators get overthrown by massive, sweeping popular uprisings. Millions of citizens in the streets demanding democracy. Or maybe you'd think foreign intervention, right? Well, it turns out the actual data tells a completely different and honestly a way more surprising story.
Okay, let's dive into this. The numbers show us that regime insiders and military coups cause practically almost all dictator replacements in surviving autocracies. It's crazy. Way more dictatorships actually end by being overthrown by the very officers who are entrusted to defend the regime than by mass public uprisings and foreign interventions put together. So, the biggest threat to a dictator, it isn't the public. It's the guys sitting right there in the room with him.
There's a quote that perfectly nails this reality. Members of dictatorial elites live in grim, dog-eat-dog worlds. The inner circle of a regime isn't just some relaxed VIP club. It is a terrifying pressure cooker of intense paranoia, secrecy, and just cutthroat competition. The leader and their most trusted allies are basically locked in a constant paranoid struggle for dominance. Because, think about it, in this world, losing power doesn't mean you get a quiet retirement and a nice pension. Nope, it usually means imprisonment, exile, or even death.
Section 1. The Dictator's Play. Divide, Conquer, and Personalize.
So, how exactly does a single person manage to dominate a room completely full of heavily armed, wildly ambitious rivals? Well, it boils down to a very systematic process of division and personalization. The ultimate endgame for an autocrat is to build what political scientists call a personalist dictatorship. That's when the leader manages to grab unconstrained personal control over all the key levers of power. We're talking high-level appointments, the military, the country's bank accounts, the whole shebang. A textbook historical example here is Islam Karimov, the first dictator of independent Uzbekistan. When he first started out, he was actually incredibly weak. He wasn't some huge clan leader. The real power brokers literally just saw him as a malleable puppet. So, how on earth did he pull off becoming an absolute ruler?
Let's move to and see how this builds over time with the Karimov playbook. Back in 1991, he suddenly banned the Communist Party. Boom, right there, he strips his elite rivals of their institutional base and their cushy jobs. Then, in 1994, he arrests the immensely powerful head of cadre policy. Fast forward to 1998, he's gathered enough strength to temporarily dismiss members of the formidable Jurabakov clan, and by 2004, he permanently purges them. Over just about a decade, Karimov methodically stripped these competing regional clans of their power, shrinking that inner circle of beneficiaries down to basically just his own family. Now, Karimov pulled this whole thing off using a strategy that's often beautifully and terrifyingly described as dancing on the heads of snakes. He survived and concentrated all that power specifically because the ruling elites, these different Uzbek clans, were totally fractured. This elite factionalism meant they actually distrusted each other way more than they distrusted him. So Karimov expertly played them against one another. He juggled their interests, dealt with them all separately, and because they simply could not unite to form a credible threat, he could just pick them off one by one, constantly shifting the balance of power back in his favor.
Section 2. The Allies' Dilemma. The Threat of Rebellion.
Okay, so we've seen the dictator's playbook. But what about the guys in the inner circle? It begs a pretty glaring question. If the dictator is systematically hogging all the power and picking off rivals, why don't the elites just band together and overthrow him before it's too late? I mean, why just sit there and let Karimov arrest you one by one? Well, the answer comes down to this massive collective action problem that keeps the inner circle entirely paralyzed and compliant.
Let's actually break down the grim, high-stakes mental math an insider has to do before even thinking about launching a coup. First, you have to secretly gauge if enough of the other elites are going to support you. But remember, every conversation is highly monitored. Second, if you guess wrong and fail to get that support, the penalty is usually execution, not just for you, but for your family too. Because that risk is just so astronomically high, step 3 basically becomes the default for everyone. Most elites strategically choose to just keep their heads down, stay quiet, and wait to see who wins.
And this brilliantly illustrates the core dynamic of authoritarian survival. It was actually captured perfectly by the philosopher David Hume, who said, "Their ignorance of each other's intentions is the sole cause of his security." Because the elites don't know for sure if their peers are going to join a rebellion or just immediately betray them to the dictator, they stay absolutely quiet. The dictator isn't holding on to power purely through brute strength. He's doing it by keeping his own allies completely in the dark about each other's true loyalties.
Section 3. The Allies' Play, the Institutional Solution.
But look, the Allies aren't totally helpless here. They need a strategy to survive this too. And there is a massive stark contrast between informal rule and formal institutions. Under informal rule, literally everything is ambiguous. The paranoia is off the charts, power sharing is just some unspoken, flimsy promise, and purges happen in secret backrooms. But formal institutions completely change the game. By forcing the creation of clear term limits, mandatory Politburo meetings, and structured councils, the elites create transparency. These formal rules define exactly what a violation of power sharing looks like, which essentially eliminates the terrifying ambiguity of that constant shadow war.
So the crucial point is that in a dictatorship, formal institutions like legislatures and party committees, they are almost never actually designed to represent the public. Their real, hidden function is to ensure elite survival. They create vital transparency among the inner circle. They act as a built-in monitoring system to make sure the dictator is actually sharing the wealth and the power. And they provide a safe, predictable forum to hash out disputes without anyone having to draw a weapon. Essentially, they are designed to keep the dictator on a leash.
A really brilliant example of this transition in action is post-Mao China. Mao Zedong ruled with completely arbitrary, unchecked power. He was driven by a massive personality cult and lifelong tenure. His inner circle literally lived in constant fear of being purged on a whim. But after Mao died, Deng Xiaoping stepped in and engineered a heavily structured system specifically for the elites. He introduced term limits, mandatory retirement ages, and a whole system built around consensus decision-making. And it worked. These institutions successfully constrained future Chinese leaders like Hu Jintao, ensuring a balance of power and a civilized transfer of authority that kept the elites safe.
But what happens when the dictator just decides to try and bypass those rules? Well, let's pivot to a really thrilling historical showdown that happened in the post-Stalin Soviet Union. Back in 1957, Soviet leader Nikita Khrushchev was suddenly challenged by a faction of hardliners in what became known as the anti-party plot. These guys were absolutely terrified that Khrushchev was about to marginalize them, so they ambushed him with a sudden vote to strip him of his power.
Now, what's really interesting about this slide is just looking at the sheer numbers of this showdown. Inside the highest decision-making body, which was the Presidium, Khrushchev was heavily outnumbered. The vote went 7-4 against him. Now, in the old days of pure, cutthroat, informal rule, he would have been completely finished right then and there. But Khrushchev cleverly utilized formal institutions to save his own skin. He argued that the Presidium couldn't legally fire him without the official approval of the broader Central Committee. And because Khrushchev had strategically empowered that Central Committee through earlier administrative reforms, they were totally loyal to him. So that broader institution voted 107-13 in his favor, completely crushing the coup.
Section 4. The final score. The delicate balance of power.
So we've seen the dictator's moves, and we've seen the Allies' desperate countermoves. But what is the final score here? The impact of these formal rules is just undeniable. Simply having a formal authoritarian legislature results in a massive 70% decrease in the risk of a coup. By bringing the inner circle into a room, sharing the spoils of power transparently, and actually giving them a formal stake in the regime, a dictator dramatically reduces the chances of being violently overthrown by their own military and allies. So yeah, institutions, even totally fake democratic ones, fundamentally stabilize autocracies. However, there is a pretty major catch. These institutions only work when the balance of power is actually even. If a dictator is already way too powerful, say if he controls all the money and all the guns, kind of like Stalin in his later years, well then he can simply ignore the rules altogether and turn the legislature into a meaningless rubber stamp. The survival game really only remains a game as long as the dictator actually needs his allies to rule. The very second he doesn't need them anymore, all those protective rules just vanish into thin air. Which leaves us with an incredibly fascinating perspective to take away from today's explainer. The very next time you see a news clip of an authoritarian leader addressing a massive crowd, I really want you to ask yourself, who actually holds the real power in that room? Is it the man yelling at the podium? Or is it the men standing quietly in the shadows, right behind him, calculating their next move?
Thanks so much for joining me for this explainer. Keep questioning the rules of the game, and I'll see you next time.